money. True supercuts are actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, hi there. I'm Diana Montford, the world's first transgender television journalist. How do you like them apples? Anyway, I was born male, I became female, just in case you were wondering. But anyway, well, female-ish. But anyway, my guest is, now you've seen her everywhere, you've seen her forever, hopefully you'll continue to see her forever, a truly groundbreaking, historic journalist. I always call her a legendary journalist, which she and the equally legendary Andy Hum are, Miss Ann Northrop, co-host of Gay USA, a world-famous television show that has changed many lives for the better.
I hope so.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, it changed your life for the better.
It certainly did. Yeah, that's an excellent insight. Yes, absolutely correct.
So, we're going to talk about young people coming to terms with being LGBT, how that feels, what it was like for us, what it can be like for you, or someone you know, or someone you love. You know, to be an outsider is never easy. But take heart, most people are outsiders one way or another, including 51% of the U.S. population, women, according to the patriarchy. So everyone is an outsider.
Wouldn't it be nice if all the outsiders banded together and took power?
Yes, but we are trained to hate one another so that we won't divide and conquer.
Yes, very bad.
Yes, but anyway, I hear you're a lesbian. Rumor has it.
Yes.
Or are you just waiting for the right guy?
No, I am. But it did take me a while to come to terms with that. Now, I'm old, so I grew up in a time that is different from this time, and things are better now. But I'm going to assert as we go along that it's not nirvana still. But you know, growing up in the 50s and 60s in the suburbs, as I did around the country, the suburbs of Hartford, Washington, Boston, Denver, Chicago, I assumed, as I think everybody does, really, still to this day, I assumed that I was straight. And when I started to realize I was having feelings for other girls, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. There was certainly not the information there is now, not the images, not the people who are out. And
it was all Bebo Brinker and all that.
I wasn't even into
Life
that.
in the village.
Yeah, exactly. Even not in my suburban neighborhoods, not even that. So it just, I couldn't believe it. You know, it was like, okay, maybe I'm having these feelings, but they'll go away. They aren't real.
Well, they used to say that.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And I believed that because what did I see around me? I saw everybody having these heterosexual relationships, and that was certainly what my parents were expecting of me. And I ended up as a Boston debutante, and it just felt like a very straight and narrow path. And these feelings I was having were weird and different, and just things I tried to ignore and tried to not believe. Even as I was aware of these feelings, I just, you know, ran away from them.
You have great courage because you could very easily, I mean, you are, to use that hideous phrase, straight looking, straight acting. So, I mean, you could just have married a guy, had a kid or two or three, be a country club gal, you know, play tennis.
But I didn't want to.
That's where the courage comes in.
Well, it's
because you could have very easily.
And many people do, and I might have. But something in me could just not connect with that. I mean, that was the world I grew up in, and I did assume for many years that was me. And dealing with my conflicted feelings was torturous. And I've told the story that you've heard of how I would lie awake at night in my teen years, thinking about the knife drawer in the kitchen, and was that how I was going to kill myself? Luckily, I did not act on that. Many people do, and I have great empathy for them because I understand those feelings, that terror, that fear of being so different and so inappropriate.
I grew up being so obviously gay from day one. There was no chance at all that I could pass for straight. I mean, I was like Kim Novak at 3 or 4, you know? So I
love Kim Novak.
I did too. I loved her so much I thought I was Kim Novak. But anyway, you know.
Well, there is a variety of experiences, and that's the point, that there is no one mold, that some people can pass, some people can't. People grow up in all sorts of different circumstances.
If I were you, and I were as straight seeming as you are,
yeah,
I'm not sure I would have had the character to say, no, I'm going to be gay. I might have said, darling, let's get married, you know, because it's so much easier.
For me, that would have been harder because that wasn't what I wanted. And so I don't think of myself as brave. I think of myself as someone who ultimately, and it took me a very long time, acted on my feelings. But what I assumed when I finally came to terms with the fact that I was a lesbian, that these were the feelings that I was having, that I was attracted to my high school classmates or teachers or friends or whatever, I assumed that that was impossible for me to act on, that in my world, that was just impossible. There was no one I saw who was doing that.
No female gym teacher who gave you a glimmering that, oh, I can do that?
No, I had a crush on my female gym teacher, but she was not responding, and she was not acting like that, and that just was not visible in my world. So it seemed impossible for me. That was not going to be allowed in my universe. And so my analysis then was, all right, then I'm just going to be alone for the rest of my life because I will not be allowed to act on that. I don't want the other. I don't want to be with boys or men. It just is not appealing to me. I don't hate them. I just am not attracted to them.
That's a common misconception. Lesbians do not hate men. They just don't want to have sex with them, but they don't hate them.
I sometimes think straight women hate men more than...
they have greater experience and greater reason to.
Well, and straight men have a lot of contempt for women.
Oh, well, Donald Trump, for one. I mean, you know. But I mean...
So to me, the equation was, you're not allowed to do that, therefore you will be alone. And that was how I lived for quite a while. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I actually finally fell for someone who fell for me. And that was my first girlfriend. I so envy people who manage to find a same-sex partner earlier in life.
Yeah.
It took me a long time because I just didn't feel entitled to that. And then once I did, I came out to the entire world within 2 weeks because my attitude was very, okay, it's my turn. You've all been doing this all your lives. Now it's my turn, and I am not waiting another minute. So that was great. And I've been able to live my life openly since the 70s and been very happy doing that and felt very lucky to be who I am, and it has never struck me as a question of courage. It's struck me as I have an attitude of gratitude for all of that. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that sort of cliched rhyming thing.
Well, but honesty is courage. In a world that where rewards mendacity, honesty is courage.
I think it's a gift and a privilege because so many people are in a position where they can't tell the truth for one reason or another.
Sure.
Obviously there are liars who are just mean and nasty and manipulative, but I feel for the people who don't feel it's possible for them to tell the truth. And there are a lot of people who are in a lot more physical danger than I ever was. And I try to remain aware of that because I don't want to say to people, you know, everybody has to do such and such. But the greatest privilege for me actually was the years I spent working at the Hedrick Martin Institute for Lesbian and Gay Youth. I had been a mainstream journalist. I had worked as a writer-producer at CBS News, at Good Morning America, at mainstream news magazines. That journalism had been my path. It's what I wanted to do. But I got sick of it. In the mainstream. I had spent a couple of years at CBS calling my bosses intellectually bankrupt.
To their faces?
Yes.
Good. None of that, Mr. Grant. Yeah.
No, because I hated what they were doing. It just seemed so stupid to me. And that was 30 years ago.
When the news of 30 years ago is comparable with Edward R. Murrow. The news of today is, you know.
Yes.
And now Kim Kardashian's new look.
Oh, please. And I appreciate trash TV, but not the Kardashians.
Oh,
but I walked out of there. I quit. I couldn't stand it anymore, and I quit.
Well, that's courage.
That took a little courage. That I'll agree with you on, because I walked away because the prestige of working at CBS News was not worth the horror of the stupidity that I had to effect. So
Did you have to play girl?
No, I was out. I was out at Good Morning America.
No, but even so, men can sort of give you a look like, listen, girlie, you're out of line.
I had a boss who was quite flirtatious and who took me into his office one day and shut the door and said, okay, so, you know, when are we going to sleep together? And I said, excuse me, you know me, the lesbian, we're not going to sleep together. And we'd had a very wonderful friendship that was a little flirtatious, but for my part, just in a, you know, fun, silly way. And that changed my career path there. He was not so happy to play around anymore. So there was some of that.
You're lucky you didn't say, listen, honey, once you've had me, you won't be a lesbian.
No.
Which men do say.
Well, I don't know what he thought, but luckily he was actually let go while I was still there, and I went on to success there, but I, in the end, couldn't stand it, and I left. And then I thought about what I wanted to do and what would actually make me happy every day instead of demeaning myself with stupidity.
But so many women have to do that.
Sure.
In every field of
Well,
endeavor.
I think people think they do more than they actually have to. And I am discouraged by the extent to which people stay in jobs that, and again, I don't underestimate the financial edge that people live on. If you're a single mother
with 3 or 4 kids, you cannot.
Well, sure, of course. But, and yes, there are absolutely imperatives and needs that keep people in all sorts of situations. But there are a lot of people who stay in jobs and justify it.
It's inertia. They don't want to look
exactly, or they're interested in status, or they're interested in huge money, which is really far more than they need, and they will do stupid stuff just for that.
Was CBS money good?
It was, absolutely, and I walked away from that, and ended up. It's a longer story, but I ended up because I decided I wanted to be a gym teacher. And teach field hockey to cranky private school girls like myself. Yes. But that, in a number of twists and turns, led me to the Hedrick Martin Institute, which has the Harvey Milk High School for young LGBT kids, many of whom are homeless, all of whom are there because they can't survive in the regular city schools.
Many of whom are gender variant, which is why they can't survive.
Whatever, some of them
that
were...
would not have been your path.
it was
not. Well, first, your parents would have died if you said, "I want
please.
to go." Yeah,
It
but
was,
second,
it was. It was a very different world for me, and I went there just because I thought it would be interesting. And I was offered a job doing advocacy for AIDS education in the schools because the agency had a contract with the city health department to advocate for AIDS education. It was the late 80s, 1987. The AIDS epidemic was raging.
And it was truly deadly in those days.
Absolutely. And so the LGBT community was perceived as having expertise, and so they wanted to put out a contract to do that.
There was a patriarchal bias. Well, lesbians are women, so they can nurture the gay men. You know, I mean, there was
I resent that. Yeah. So, so I went there and I said, look, I've been covering this epidemic in mainstream news for years, but I don't really know enough to teach this stuff. They said, oh no, we just want you to go advocate for this education. Well, that was a big lie. I actually had to immediately go into schools and start teaching kids. And
straight schools?
Absolutely, yeah, schools all over the metropolitan area, Catholic schools, public schools, drug programs.
And I both went to Catholic school.
Oh, absolutely.
And you know what a hotbed of gay activity that is.
Well, this was everywhere, and we decided that we had to do two things. We had to do a sort of AIDS 101 class to teach people the basics because they really didn't know. They weren't getting the education elsewhere. And we also had to do a Homo 101 class because so much of the ignorance about AIDS was a resistance to learning because they associated it with homosexuality. So they didn't want to learn, and they didn't want to be associated with something that was stigmatized as gay.
So basically you were giving them sensitivity training regarding LGBT people.
I was going into classrooms all over the city and saying, hi, I'm your local lesbian, ask me anything.
Did the girls giggle and look at you?
Everybody giggled, and we would have 45 minutes to do this whole class, and we developed a whole strategy for doing this, and I cannot tell you the number of times we went into, you know, Canarsie or the South Bronx and had kids say at the end of 45 minutes, you have completely changed my mind. I started this class thinking I want to kill you, and now I really...
I just want to injure you now.
No, I totally support what you're saying. I get it now. I'm sorry for all the bad things I've done. And I had a teacher stop me on the street once and say, you changed my school. Because of what you brought in. Because we brought in honesty, we brought in respect for the kids, no matter where they were in their questions, and we had honest conversations with them, and were willing to open ourselves up, you know, to a certain extent, and have these conversations. And it taught me so much about the coming out process for these kids and them coming to terms with themselves. And
it must be very different in the inner city where, you know, my heel is hooked on the chair, where machismo is prevalent. Even the girls are pretty tough.
Well, they are, but here was the most fascinating thing I learned, because I did go to a range of schools, and I found, to my despair, that the private schools, which were the kinds of schools I'd gone to, were the hardest to deal with, because the kids there are so invested in being part of the power elite and in maintaining a certain status that they were the most closed, and they were the most...
That's why you thought of killing yourself, because you were divorcing yourself from the power elite
exactly.
forever.
But it was exactly what I had gone through. I identified certainly with them. I once, after doing a session with the faculty at a private girls' school, the headmistress took me aside into her office and told me I was a traitor to my class.
Oh my God.
I swear to God, that's exactly what she said to me. A traitor to my class. And that that was heartbreaking because I could see these kids in these schools struggling with this so much and having this conversation. But I could go to the South Bronx, or I could go to a drug rehab program for kids in Staten Island and have much easier conversations.
But isn't that because when you were in a private school, you were dealing with your own kind, and they would say, oh, don't listen to that lesson?
No, it was because...
Whereas when you go to the South Bronx, it's, oh, Saint White Lady, tell us.
No. It was because we could identify with each other's oppression. It's because they understood oppression, and because the way I talk about both AIDS and homosexuality incorporates everybody's oppression, and the fact, you know, the AIDS epidemic, to me, is very much in the whole line of the Vietnam War and civil rights and everything, because to me...
I just thought it was a Nixon germ warfare plot, frankly.
Well, I don't. I think it's a virus that, you know, appeared in the population and slowly over many years spread. But the people in power didn't want to do anything about it. And they were perfectly happy to have people without power die, and just by attrition. And that is the same thing that happened in them sending people off to die in Vietnam, or
Iraq, or Afghanistan, or anywhere else.
Or Little Rock and Selma and Birmingham. So when you talk about it in those terms to people who are in oppressed circumstances in the South Bronx, and help them understand what the real power dynamics are for all of us, then you break through to have a conversation. And I'm not the elite white lady coming from the private school. I'm just a person who is there having an honest conversation with them about these issues.
Just a person, since you are the embodiment of the oppressor to these people, and you are benign enough to share the bounty of your intelligence with them.
This is awful.
Well,
no, I had, look, they're intelligent human beings, and
I was never given credit for that.
Well, I gave them credit for that, and I went in with an attitude of respect, and I respected where they were because that's what they've been taught. So if they started out with, you know, we did an exercise at the beginning where we'd have them give us a list of words they associated with homosexuality, for instance.
Oh, I wouldn't want to hear that list.
Well, I'm fine with hearing it because that is what they've been taught. And my job is to honor that and honor the fact that they are good students of what's out in the world.
I'm not putting down people.
But then to dissect that
and conditioning,
and to give them a different point of view, and give them an opportunity to make up their own minds about what is real and what isn't. And I found them enormously intelligent, enormously open, and what we would do for most of the time once we got through that exercise was invite them to ask any question they want. I think the mistake people make is saying to young people or anybody, you can't ask that question, you can't say that. And instead...
But you know you grew up that way because there are a lot of thou shalt nots in a WASP world, aren't there?
Well, absolutely, and I hated that. So in going to the beauty and the joy of this job that I had for these years was to be able to put all that aside and take a completely different approach and invite an open conversation.
Did the bad boys in the back of the room ask obscene questions?
Sure. And I would laugh along with them, or, you know, I wasn't going to say things I didn't want to say, and I would draw the line where it was appropriate. But I also was happy to answer their real questions. And some of them were about gender roles and, you know, if you have two women in a relationship, how do you know who's in charge?
Yeah.
Yes. It was hilarious. So I would always I'd say, girls, how do you feel about that question? I had a lot of fun with it, but mostly I appreciated the opportunity to have these honest conversations. And I think still, obviously, too often as human beings, we don't have these conversations, and I think that's too bad, and I think that's a lot of why the world is screwed up and why we are separated from each other.
Do you think we'll still be having, not us, but someone will still be having this conversation 200 years from now?
Unfortunately, yes. I would like to think we will advance, but I think human beings are very flawed creatures. And I think there are a lot of forces that keep us scared and divided. Mm-hmm. But I think if people will take the chance to talk to each other, I mean, look at all the drug addiction we have. That's all about pain and fear and it's just a tragedy. So I think it is better for LGBT kids these days. I think we've come a long way, but I think we have a long way to go. And I think we should not underestimate the extent to which people still feel a lot of fear and isolation.
Wouldn't they if they liked eating bonbons in a Weight Watchers place? I mean, whenever you do something that's forbidden, you're going to feel a little...
Now look, there are boys and girls who are afraid to tell each other that they have crushes on each other.
Sure.
It's we all have our, we all grow up in a little fear and isolation. Mm. So I want us to be a little more gentle with each other.
If you could say something to gay young people out there, what would you say? What would some young gay person who might have been looking into that silverware drawer, or, thinks he's Kim Novak or something, is, what are you going to say to that person?
That to worry about the opinions of people who don't like you is the definition of crazy. That really your job is to find people who like you and will support you. Starting with yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you can find first one other person who can be your friend, great. And please don't worry about the opinions of people who criticize you or don't like you. That will drive you crazy and is a real mistake.
And you can't please all the people all the time, and it really does get better.
It can. I'm not making any guarantees.
No, but it usually does, mainly because you get used to the abuse.
Well, it certainly got better for me.
And me.
And the process of going out and doing this education was as good for my own ego as it was educational for them. It was a gift to me, and I am tremendously grateful for that. And then and I was also doing activism at the same time as I came into the community. And now I've been able to put it all back together.
How long has Gay USA been on the air?
Over 30 years.
Since when?
The 80s, mid-80s. And I've been doing it since 96, so I have now done...
Who did it before?
21 years. Well, Andy's been doing it almost the full 32 years or whatever, but he had some previous co-hosts we don't need to talk about.
Oh, okay. Anyway, but this is someone we do need to talk about. My guest has been the fabulous, legendary journalist Ann Northrop. I'm Diana Montfort. This has been the Diana Montfort Show. Even if no one else loves you, I love you. And love yourself, for God's sake. Look, you're gay, okay? It's not a big deal. Relax. It's okay. Hey, we like you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love you a lot. See you next time. Mwah. See you next time. Take good care of yourself. Hey, we really do love you. You're us. We're you, okay?
Thank you, Diana. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure.